What are the problems, though? What does it pick out? Because before we go into the report, let's just pull out the key, because we'll gloss through these in the report. It's not going to be an hours and hours page turn. We're going to kind of jump through the key findings and then jump into what it kind of draws out of that. So some of the key findings of this. So first of these, existing lower density suburbs in the UK are packing in more and bigger cars, and then paving over gardens to accommodate them. It's like I said in the intro, right? There are 34 million cars in the UK, which is the highest number ever recorded, and SUVs are now the majority of new car sales. Bigger and wider. Oh, by the way, bad for multiple reasons. Some people often say, well, why does it matter? You know, it's about the same weight as an estate. Firstly, no, it isn't. Secondly, because the harm for vulnerable road users, whether that's cyclists or pedestrians, is increasing rapidly as a result of more of these cars, these very high bonneted cars that have a much higher likelihood of killing the people that they hit rather than rolling them over the bonnet. So these are actively dangerous vehicles that should never have been allowed to be on the road in the first place, let alone becoming the dominant form. And for anyone who doesn't know, the reason why we're seeing SUV sales is not because people want those cars. It's because the automotive industry costs the same for them to build a super mini, costs the same to build a Ford Fiesta as it does to build an enormous Ford SUV. Basically the same. You're just talking, the only extra cost is in slightly increased amounts of sheet metal. It's got all the same internals, HVAC, the engine, all that stuff is where the cost in building it is. It's basically the same. But they have to sell the Fiesta for far less. Therefore, that's why there are no longer any Fiestas. Obviously, the automotive industry, which is, as we've talked about in many episodes before, struggling and seeing a cliff edge of you're gone, China's beaten you coming up. They're desperate to make as much money as possible, which is why we're seeing the world of SUVs, because SUVs, they can charge more, they can have a more favorable finance, and there are lots of consequences to this. You know, bigger and wider cars. You know, since 2018, the average width of cars has risen by, you know, upwards of 5 centimeters or more, and their mass has increased by like 250 kilos. That's serious increase in size. The result of that is that we have roads that can't move traffic through as well. You know, no longer can you fit your car parks that don't work as well. The capacity of our road to move vehicles around has been reduced by the fact that these cars are increasing, and taking, you know, a road that previously could have a lane of parked cars and comfortably fit 2 lines of traffic going in opposite directions no longer can. Also, this means that we're losing a lot of green space, which means that our urban space, our urban fabric, is less resilient to climate change, because the flood hydrograph, you know, the water falls, the rain falls, immediately flows through the urban realm into watercourses, rather than having green spaces, gardens, to slow that. Also, you're getting all the heating effects of a tarmacked over garden. It is not good. So that's one of our key findings. Number 2 key finding: many new suburbs are badly built and poorly designed and located. Designed around the car, lacking public amenities and services, amenities, including public transport. Yep, they're often hostile to wheeling, cycling, walking. I kind of talked about that in the in the aerial image we looked at a minute ago. You know, that design of squiggles. It's awful, absolutely awful urban design. A lot of it is like police input secured by design, says, oh, design the roads to be all weavy and then people can't rat run through. It's like, no, you stop the rat running by actually designing an urban realm that is, you're designing those roads, firstly, by putting the transport planners and the highways, particularly the highways engineers and highways officers, through a blender. And then you get someone else, a placemaker, to design the urban realm, following the transport hierarchy, where the ability to move the cars around is the last thing you look at. First of all, you prioritize how the humans move around in the suburbs. Number 3, though, millions of households have no way of charging vehicles on or outside their property. This is a sore problem. In a way, the suburbs are generally more likely, outer suburbs at least, are more likely to have this space rather than inner suburbs, but it is a massively mixed picture across the UK. Go back to the episode with Leo Murray and I, where we talked about what that charging infrastructure, the challenges with charging infrastructure. But currently 90% of EV charging takes place at the home. And despite the fact, 30% of UK households do not have access to off-street charging. And there is, more than half of local authorities have absolutely no on-street residential charging strategy. They have no plan for how that can work. It's a whole can of worms, right? But that is absolutely a problem for the, for what we're facing coming up in terms of decarbonisation. It's worth saying now that we've got a nice, rather than a news segment, we've got a single big lump, an interview with Professor Greg Marsden from the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds, where we're going to talk in detail about where the UK currently sits with its surface transport decarbonisation. It's a really interesting segment, about 50 minutes of detailed chat, where we kind of go into the real actual trajectories currently plotted by government policy. So yeah, well worth, it's a bit of an episode of Two Halves in a sense, well worth sticking with us for when that comes up. So what are the other key findings? Well, some of the most promising alternatives to single occupancy car use are the most neglected by policymakers. Where is the legislation for e-scooters to be legalized? Like, that is legislation that is transparently been lobbied against because there is an awareness from the automotive industry, probably most of all, but also others, that possibly from the micromobility sort of tech industry, who's hoping to continue to make it higher only. Well, there's a huge fear that those e-scooters are going to cut into their margins, which is why they've not been legalized. I'm sorry. Issues with batteries. It's a bit like legalizing drugs. Like, the issue with all the knockoff batteries is because it is currently an illegal market, essentially, to get to buy e-scooters. They're not road legal. That needs to be reversed. And the legislation to provide that has been kicked into touch. Where is it? That should have been, they're supposed to have been legalized years ago. 36 million empty car seats on the morning commute. So car sharing is another really good example. In Germany, 5.5 shared cars per 10,000 people. In the UK, it's 0.6. So absolutely hopeless. So if we could increase average car occupancy rates, that would make a massive difference, potentially saving 3 million tons of CO2 by 2030, which, by the way, is about as much CO2 you'd save if you electrified Britain's railways overnight. 3 million tons of CO2. So that's significant. That is a significant amount of CO2 savings annually. The last, though, is that there is a bit of hope. There are examples of good practice in the UK, with social and public housing now seeing decarbonisation as more of a priority. So we are seeing this. We're seeing the energy sector decarbonising at an extraordinary rate, which gives opportunities for the transport sector to kind of exploit that to kind of decarbonise and to rely on electricity as a way to decarbonise surface transport. But it requires charging strategies for suburban areas. It requires much better integration of the suburbs into public transport as well.